Well, good day, everyone. Thanks for being here again. And we've already got things set up so that I'm working from two computers, and hopefully this will work well tonight. But it may not. It may have its issues, and it will have its issues. It's just already told me that. Um, I don't know that I can get a preview screen on that. So we will share my entire desktop if that works, Peter. And I've got to find out which one's me. That's me. So I want to share entire screen. Yes, I want to share the entire screen and share. And yep, okay, it's given to the infinity screen. That means we've got it done right, guys. So I apologize for an infinity, but that's where we need to start. So this, believe it or believe it not, is a grub in a tree. And a grub that's doing incredible damage. Got no idea what it is, but it's been sent in by Jason Paxton. I don't know whether Jason's online. So hopefully Jason is going to be able to answer some questions for us. There's some palm trees. And he wants some extra questions answered because he thinks because he's on tonight that he gets the go at having multiple questions. So, Jason, what's your question about the palm trees?
You're on mute, Jason. We're not hearing you, Jason.
That's okay. For the record, the Liverstone australis or thereabouts, I'd say australis, and they're just having a hard time. Anyone in Sydney here online today? Anyone want to guess why they're having a hard time in Sydney?
Is it raining?
No, it's dry. This is a literal rainforest species, so it likes really moist conditions. So I would be saying have a look at what the climatic conditions are doing. And that, again, same sort of situation and comment. I'll do the rest of the palms whilst I'm at it. Hopefully Jason's able to hear this. So I've already seen that shot, I think. So palms are like any other tree. Things are going tough. You start getting rid of the most redundant. The other thing that this could be is a little bit of salt burn. They've gone into a garden bed, and it's possible that the garden bed has too high levels of, one of the NPKs. Landscape has been involved and mixed too much stuff in. But it's abiotic and not biotic by the looks of it. Okay, back to our grub. And you can see what it's doing is skeletonizing. So how are we going to find out what it is?
Yeah, you don't want to Google Lens that.
Well, you could Google Lens that, and that's a perfectly great way of doing it. So we could have a look at that and see whether we can Google Lens, and I'll try that at the moment to see whether that actually works because I've got it on my phone. Jason Paxton sent me some images, and if I download them all to my phone, then I can look them up in Google's, particularly if he's taken them recently. Yep, he's taken them recently. And I'll show you the photographs. The damage is extreme, absolutely extreme. And Lens. Well, the first thing that Google suggests is perhaps a sawfly larvae.
Can you hear me now, Mark?
Yeah, I can hear you now, Jason.
All right, excellent.
Please go back in.
Yeah,
All
we
right,
got you, Jason.
all right, beautiful.
Let's go dismiss now.
All right, so yeah, sorry, I had a trouble with my microphone. Those trees are located at Alexandria. We just found them today. They were looked at between 4 and 6 weeks ago. Extreme damage to the leaf, 50 to 70% of the canopy on one tree, probably 30 to 40 on the adjacent tree. And I haven't seen the larvae in abundance, but there is a few there, but it's not like there's a heap on the ground or anything like that. But
Yeah, no, but it's interesting. There were a few giveaways that it might have been a sawfly larvae.
yeah, I thought the skeletonizing perhaps.
Remember, if you look at the cherry slug,
Thank you.
which is a sawfly larvae, it's a similar thing, but I have never seen it before in anything like this. So it's pretty neat to see. It's definitely what's causing you damage.
The last, I'd sent you the last email and I got some close-ups of them too.
Yeah, we've already had a look at a few of those, Jason. But this is the damage. You can see the extreme nature of the damage. Is that large enough for everyone? I'll go bigger. Is that better?
It's okay.
Yep. So fairly extreme damage being caused by the thing. So possibly a sawfly. But how are we going to know for certain?
What about a lab test?
Yeah, look, a lab test. So you could send it away for DNA. And, that's going to cost you $130 to $150, depending. There are some other options, though, I think.
Could I suggest that you collect some samples and allow them to hatch and have a look at the result?
And exactly. Grab some, keep feeding them, let them grow on until they pupate. After pupation, it's just a matter then of patience waiting for them to come out, and almost certainly you'll see a wasp. But I've never seen one like this before, and the fact that it's so out of filter is interesting. This sort of outbreak behavior is always intriguing. Jason,
So, species Eucalyptus globulus, and our remediation first off this morning or this afternoon is we pumped approximately about 30 litres per square metre of water in there just to try and improve a little bit of health and vigour to the tree.
Yeah.
And so that was first stage, only discovered today.
And look, they're beautifully skeletonizing. They're doing a wonderful job. I mean, I admire the handiwork and what they're doing, because it's having a huge influence on the tree. But these are fairly large-sized trees by the looks of them. Is that right, Jason?
Yeah, they're probably 20 metres tall, close to 20 metres spread.
And now the preview wants to come on, Peter. Look at that for the amount of damage. So this is an outbreak behavior, and every now and again nature does this for reasons we don't know. What we do know is there's a good population of sawfly that have been present on that tree, and it's not a common problem that we see in Sydney. I don't know if we've got anyone from Tasmania or Rob, you're in Victoria. Have you seen anything like this before?
Never seen anything like that. But my question is, does it really matter what it is? Because the more pressing question is what to do about it.
Jason's already answered half the question. Stimulate new foliage development. How do we do that? Make sure the root system's functioning, and the tree will start to shed the canopy and grow new shoots. It's just a natural response, provided soil moisture is right. Sydney has been in a dry period for about the last, let's say, 12 weeks or so.
Yep.
So pumping on the water was a good first start.
There's a few different things that can cause major defoliation of trees, eucalypts, and unless it's repeated, happens again and again and again, they generally recover. So things like salt damage or psyllid damage, you get a lot of leaf damage, and the tree will just shed the old leaves and grow new ones.
Yeah, and that's what we want to encourage that. The first stage is, again, the use of that horrible, nasty chemical called water. And, you know, it just does such a good job. So there's a little bit of green that hasn't been affected, but that's a huge, huge number of larvae to do that sort of damage.
So just the angle you were looking at there, for interest's sake, is the northern side, and the adjacent tree to that, which is to the south, most of the damage is on the northern side as well.
Yeah.
There is down, you can see that red box, it's a fire sprinkler unit.
Yeah.
That is new construction. So there may have been some root damage that has put the tree under some stress as well.
Yeah, but these outbreaks, again, are usually independent of those things. They're usually really subtle. Like some of you will see a psyllid outbreak at some stage or other, or a cup moth outbreak, or a bag moth outbreak, cicada outbreak. All these things come in these weird little cycles. And, you know, sometimes the cause is just so subtle that it's almost missed in most cases, and certainly often is missed on a regular basis. So for some reason, we've got just such a huge population of a insect that I've never seen before in terms of the sawfly larvae. So this is in Sydney. So has it been brought up from Victoria? These are older, mature trees, but I would say that this problem's happened to this tree in lower levels several times. And then whatever would naturally control the sawfly is not controlling it. So just a fascinating set of scenarios. What do you do? Try and stimulate. You could try controlling the insect. That would depend on the client, whether the client's happy to use chemical treatment, sprays, or whatever.
What would you look at with that?
Pyrethrum-based spray.
Yeah.
Hopefully, Jason, you'll collect 10 or 15 of them, of the larvae, and grow them on so that we can locate what it is.
Yep.
And then in about 6 or 8 weeks' time, you may be able to know exactly what it is. But it'd be a wasp of a sawfly's a wasp.
Yep.
And this particular one has just done such a great job. I mean, that
gives you a good overall perspective.
Jason, you were saying that there weren't large number of larvae, so
Not that I was. So I was only looking at it from ground level. We only saw it today, so it was only foliage that I could visually look at from ground level, and you see, and that was only off the tree in that photo to the left, where we could actually reach the foliage.
just occurs to me that if there's a lot of damage being done, but not a lot of larvae actually present, maybe they've done their thing and a lot of them have moved on. So all that many left to control.
Yeah, perhaps.
It certainly looks that way, that they're approaching maturity just based on the size of those larvae, and we'll have one of those again. The larvae are a reasonable size already, and when you think that they've hatched from an egg, that's not going to happen.
They're probably around about, the largest ones are around about 2 centimetre mark.
Yeah, so we're getting close to their life cycle, which is why I'm saying grab some leaves, see if you can't put some leaves, fresh leaves in the fridge, just so that they stay fresh for them, and let them go hell for leather and I think you'll find they'll pupate within a week or two from where we are now.
Okay.
And then pupation, of course, is just waiting for time, and you don't know what else is happening. One of the things that we might want to see is some parasitoids, and this is where it gets difficult. So they don't come out. You could have a wasp that's attacked the wasp, and there are lots of parasitoid wasps lay a single egg inside the larvae or the pupal stage and then take over and eventually kill it. So they're pretty neat to see. But certainly one way or another we'll learn something. And that goes back to that question you asked, Peter. I think it was only last block or the block before, is how do you go about this new stuff? And the answer is look and ask questions. And here's a classic example of it. An arborist seeing something and saying, I'm not familiar with this. And then saying, who is familiar with this? And so we've now got some information. We know it's a sawfly larvae, but why has it gone to the level that it has? No idea whatsoever. I've got a few decades in me and I've never seen it before. Jeremy, have you seen anything like this in Queensland before?
Not for sawfly larvae, only for psyllids.
Yeah, psyllids.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But as you say, it'll drop all its foliage and then throw out new foliage. It's more if it's repeat that we end up with a bigger problem.
Yeah. Or if it gets broad spread. And, we're going to talk tonight about risk again. I think it's going to be on the agenda for the next 20 years. But, I'll find an arborist that sees that and says the tree is dying, it's dangerous, and it needs to be removed. So at least having someone be able to get information out there will help improve that. Does that happen in your end of the world, Jeremy?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, all the time.
Yeah.
Or we want to prune off all those branches because they're dying. So,
yeah. Well, now that they've all been done like that, the trees are an increased risk of some description. So I'll just go back up to Jason's first ones and we'll have a look at that larvae again. And there was a really good shot of, no, not the first one, the second one, was it?
There, in the last email I sent you, I got some macro photos.
Now, this is good enough in itself. That's pretty neat.
Yeah, it looks
so much like cherry slug.
Yeah,
in a giant form.
It was hard to distinguish, and I still really haven't, which is the front and the back.
I don't know, Jason. It's going to be carefully kneading away that material at the front, but I suspect that where that material is the front.
Yeah.
So I suspect that this is our front of our larvae.
Yeah, that's where it was sort of moving around from. So that was my best guess.
But certainly done some damage. And it's been a while since I've seen something new and exciting like that. This is almost like the class diagnosed tree diseases where students would bring in things and you'd say,
well, if you do find some time in the next week or so to get out there, I'm happy to meet you out there and have a look.
Yeah. If I can get the chance, I will have a run out and have a look because it's pretty neat to see something that's that unusual. When I say unusual, I've got 40 plus years of good exposure to arboriculture, and I've seen lots of things damage, but I've never seen a sawfly skeletonized like that apart from cherry slug, which is a sawfly. So, and I don't think that's cherry slug. It's way too big, and it's not a cherry.
Yeah,
so
I've never seen it before, and my encounters with it's quite limited.
So it's a good thing to do. And now, what was your issue with the palms, Jason?
Sorry, I was on mute before. I couldn't explain. Those palms are newly planted from transplant in a garden bed. They with soil, which I'm not exactly sure where that came from, which has been added to those planter boxes. They've slowly been dying back. They're getting good water, moisture levels are good. Drainage, I think, could be a little bit of an issue in the bottom of the planter boxes, but they're certainly not being flooded.
Right. As long as it's not going to be flooded, although Livingstone is really will take flooding quite happily because it's in that littoral rainforest association, and you've seen it, for example, down your end of the world as you come through that way. So it'll tolerate it, but freshly cut roots don't tolerate it, or recently cut roots. The other thing that this could have been is these could have been brought from a more shaded area to a more exposed area.
Oh, definitely. They've come from Pacific Palms, Bungwall. So sort of just north of Foster, south of Foster. And I don't know the exact location, but off the property. And there's a palm cellar up there.
Yeah, so if it's come from a fairly shaded environment, and I can take guesses, I won't name names, they could have been shaded, and that could be an issue with it. Just watch the drainage on the underside. They're fairly heavy head on them for a recent transplant, so I'm suspecting they've been moved, stored, and that storage involved shade and then brought back out in the full sun. Although if they have been stabilised, they're really stressing bad for a stabilised palm. So yeah, just keep an eye on them. Make sure you sample to a reasonable depth for saturation. And the pinch test, does everyone know about the pinch test? You know, some good things to do in terms of testing for soil. Grab some of the soil, grab a whole handful of it, and squeeze. If you get water squeeze out of it, it's saturated.
So the only issue with this soil is it's a garden mix of some sort. The supplier, I'm not sure, and the root ball of these palms came in just probably about 0.8 of a cubic meter, I suppose.
Yeah.
Really, really heavy clay.
Okay, well, that's not so bad, except the clay is going to have troubles getting water out of it. The clay is going to hold more. And the other thing is, if it's a garden mix, depending on how the soil company did it, soil companies like to add organic material to garden mix, and garden mix shouldn't have organic material added to it ideally. Organic materials added at the end on the surface. So hopefully that gives you some stuff to work with there, Jason.
No, it definitely does. Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, that's the next one. Next one, is this from you, Niels?
Correct. Yep.
Yeah. Well, you're telling me it's Comadullensis. Nothing there will let me know that, but I believe you. It's a very scrappy looking young eucalypt. Yep.
Yes, and it's about 20 years old.
Yeah, 20 years old. What's your gut level feeling?
I'm thinking it'd be something to do with the roots of some sort, because they've all been planted, obviously grown in a nursery, and I've had a lot of bad experiences with planted trees in the past with maybe girdling or J-rooting or some sort of nutrient uptake problem.
Lots of roots, yeah, and so it goes on. And that would be my gut level. First thing I'd do is what's called the Bernaley test, and that is grab a bit and try shaking it and seeing whether you can see any remnants of where the pot was. If you can see that after 20 years, it's completely stuffed. But I'm amazed at how many trees still get supplied that have got girdling roots, and then the person planting it, you know, I ain't in trouble, but landscape labourers are sometimes, you know, not the brightest. They're like excavator operators, living proof that people and gorillas can procreate and produce a viable offspring, okay? They're not bright at all. And so they plant these trees rather than going around with a box knife or a Stanley knife and cutting 6 to 12 times down and just making sure there's nothing of that girdling material left. they plant them with girdling roots. And I'm going through a number of new schools of late doing some assessments, and these are schools that have cost 40 and 50 million to build, and seen trees fallen over because the root system was faulty. It just has me beat. We've got an Australian standard. It came in 2015, but stuff's not grown to that standard widely.
Nels, do we know what sort of soil the trees were planted into?
Yeah, it's right next to the national park up here where I am, so it's fairly sandy, but with clay underneath, I think. Yeah, it's an old sheep farm, so it's fairly compacted as well. But it's not great, and we don't get much rain out here.
It just occurs to me that if you dig a little hole and put the tree in that's kind of in clay soil or forms a well, every time it gets wet, the tree will drown and then it dries out really quickly. It just kind of reminds me of that a little bit.
Yeah, except the tree behind you.
It's sort of in a depression.
This tree here was planted at the same time, I'm assuming.
Yeah, most of the trees around there, apart from the far bush line. Yeah, they would have been planted as well. Yep.
Yeah, so
there's a heap of camellia along there, and they're all going fine, but this one's struggling.
And I think we've talked before, Camellia is one of those trees that have a dimorphic or trimorphic root plate. So they have distinct layers. They'll come down and they'll have a second layer just above the permanent water layer when they're near a wet spot. And just taking out roots that go down can have a big impact on trees. And it's something we'll fight forever. This is 1852, William Barron, Chapter 4 of British Winter Garden, The Evils of Pot Growing Culture. And here we are, 170 years later and still dealing with the same problem. So we're making some improvements, and I don't know what will happen with the Australian standard for nursery stock in the long run. Trees for landscape use is the standard, sorry. But hopefully there'll be some looking towards moving at grading our material rather than just pass or no pass. Because I think grading has its advantages. It allows you to say, look, there are times when I'm happy to put in, almost junk, mass plantings, for example, where you want a certain percentage to fail. And then there are times when you want really good quality stuff and you don't want to be let down. So hopefully that's something that we might see in time. Now, the next one is when you act as a project arborist, general do's and don'ts. My experience has been most of the time I don't get to be the project arborist. I write the specifications, I say what they need, and probably I'm going to say somewhere between 2 and 5% get me in. Those that get me in, how many of them conform to the specifications that are before them and conditions of consent? Maybe 5% of those. The rest seem to always want to break the occasional thing that's given. What are other people's experiences with that? Peter, you have a different relationship with your clientele?
Not a lot different. I do act as a project arborist on some occasions, not a lot. Where I am the project arborist, there's usually some reason that they go to the trouble of actually doing that. And my experience is that they're often cooperative. Those projects are often cooperative, simply because they're being forced to, or they have a level of interest that makes them prepared to do things as well as possible. So I think that if you can get the builders, project managers to do what you've asked for in terms of tree protection, etc., that's a really big win just by itself. And everything else after that's the icing on the cake.
What if the tree management plan or the specifications that you're given, what if you don't agree with some things that's been written in there, or I got asked to do one from another company, and I think, no, this is not the best to work from. Like, I work off my own ones, and that's fine. But when you do one of someone else's,
my response to that,
were you engaged by the other company or by the client?
My response to that would be to go to whoever's in charge and say, this is rubbish and this is why it's rubbish and I want to do it like this. Do you have a problem with that?
I would be careful about the rubbish comment, but yes, in context, look, we deal with it when we get asked to put trunk protection on trees. And, you know, we produce a product, we tell you how to make it yourself, called Trunk Guard. That's our trademark, but it's the foam, styrofoam bonded to plywood. You know, you can use whatever you want. I've seen guys use fence posts. I don't care. But, you know, you've got to have some padding, and 3 wraps of hessian isn't appropriate protection in my view of the process. So I would say, look, I'm not prepared to do just straight 4x2 timbers against 3 wraps of hessian, but I can do trunk guard. Choices up to you. And I'd say, again, 9 times out of 10, the client doesn't go ahead because doing the job properly costs more. And so you have to say, do I want the work? And am I happy to go ahead with that? Remembering you're not the person that specified it. You're the person that's now doing the job, essentially, of a builder's labourer. Hey, we've got another mentor on board. Steve Kneebone's just joined with us, I see. Hi, Steve.
Hi, everybody.
Western Australian experience. Now, there's the boondocks for you. The question, Steve, is what do you do when you're asked to be the project arborist? And let's take it away from government sector, because the government's probably slightly different, but private sector, how often do what sort of proportion of your private sector projects do you become the actual project arborist to make sure they do things right?
It would probably be around that 20%, because we're 95% commercial of that. Most of them are local government, state government contractors, but you're probably dealing with the likes of people doing large scale demolition or construction from that point. We tend to do a lot of follow-up, get asked to do a lot of follow-up work, having already done the other assessments as well. On occasion, where we'll walk into somewhere and the directions that have been written, or the attempt at the directions, are ridiculous, as Peter was saying, we will politely say, listen, this is wrong because of this, and give some clear reasoning. And 99 times out of 100, they'll go, oh, okay, look, can you just do it again? And we'll listen to what you say. So if you're not accusational and you take the time to explain yourself well with sound reasoning, generally they'll go, okay. But they're generally not miles apart. Occasionally you'll come to something and you'll just shake your head in absolute disbelief. But if there's some subtle tweaks, and if it saves them a little bit of money at the same time, and it's a sensible thing that you can quantify, they will generally go, okay, look, just do that. They're not necessarily bound by what someone else may have written, but we would blatantly refuse to do something that was clearly wrong and say, I'm sorry, we can't help you on this occasion, if it was that bad and they wanted to insist to it. We've got a couple at the moment like that we're dealing with, that are just the level of quality of the report and what they're putting in it, they're basically saying nothing, and it's just a pointless document. Or one of them, I think, looked at a site with 280 trees. They're asked to do a risk assessment before anything happened, and they came up with, they did a QTRA report and did all trees were broadly acceptable or tolerable risks, yet 191 of them had to have pruning done. And we were just saying, for God's sake, what are you doing here? You actually have to do no pruning. if you want to follow the system correctly. So we're in the middle of just trying to politely respond to that one. That's an extreme, but there's a few like that. It happens.
Yeah. Okay. And Jeremy, your experience?
We probably follow through on about 25-30% of our jobs to be project arborists. We pick up probably another 20 or 30 jobs a year where I would project arborists or other people have written reports. Most of the time they've already got the approval, they're on site, they want to start, they don't want it rewritten, but we just work with them, just, okay, this is what your approval is, this is what we're going to do. And to your point of they don't do what they're supposed to do. They'll do what they're supposed to do until it's inconvenient. And when it becomes inconvenient, all of a sudden fences disappear and tracks go through. And I find the more belligerent I get with them, the more work I get out of them. Because if you just stand your ground, they respect that.
I think it's important to stand your ground. I think it's certainly important to call a spade, but again, probably a little bit more tactfully than I do it in general. That little guy that sits on my shoulder that says do or don't, usually he's gone on holidays. So, thank goodness for the people in my office that do soften down my reports. Do all projects need certifications? The next question that Neil's asked, and the answer is no, not all projects require certification, or probably should, but for example, in New South Wales, we have a whole pile of exemptions. So
it's up here, it's driven by the approval process. The only time we do a certification is if the approval process requires it. We do it internally as part of our final inspection and give them that anyway. But in terms of compliance, it's only when it's part of the conditions.
Yep. That makes sense. That's probably what I was thinking.
Steve, you've got a question, got your hand up?
Yeah. One of the things we started doing some time ago is writing some pretty detailed contractor compliance requirements. I mean, they go on site and they do work health and safety, and they've got to provide all their tickets and they've got to provide a white card. Well, we provide a form where they've got to recognise requirements of the arboricultural assessment or AS 4970, and part of that makes them aware of exactly what damage they will do if they're there, and they all have to sign it. And at the bottom it has a thing called the bond, and they see how much it's going to cost them or the company if they mess it up, and it's really effective. It's not police work, it's just explaining to them, this is what we need you to do, and if you run into a problem, don't pull the fence down, call us first and we'll come and have a look. It works really well.
Excellent. Some great advice there.
That's really good.
Reporting, the way we report is we just benchmark the conditions that relate to the trees, and usually there'll be a number from the council. Sometimes the council will refer to an arborist report as well, an arboricultural impact assessment report, and we'll go through the conditions or the recommendations in that, and then we just table it up. Does it comply? Doesn't it comply? Can it be brought into compliance? It's pretty straightforward. I just find tables great to communicate. Condition 39, what it says, were they compliant? No. What things can you do to bring it back into compliance? And you often see that, particularly when you've not been on the site during the project, that can become quite a long list of failures. So you realise that trees aren't just killed with one action. It's a lot of things combined together.
Yeah. The other thing we follow up every site inspection with an email confirmation and photos that you're actually there. So they're tagged and logged that you're actually there. So there's no, and one of the conditions that are coming out here locally is council wants an inspection log of every inspection you've done. Not often enforced, but it is actually in the condition.
And the hint that we'll give you on that, from our side is that if you can, make your inspections random. So don't tell them you're going to be out on every Tuesday. And like this time of the year, it's just wonderful. We won't tell you what time at all. And I'm quite happy to rock up to a site at 7 or 8 o'clock at night and do my inspection then. And it's amazing the things that you find. And then we send them through the reported inspection saying that we've been on the site and these are the things that we've found that were wrong. And I'm amazed more. The opposite is how many times they just keep on ignoring the thing. You can say, the fence needs to be restored to its original position, ! The next visit, the fence needs to be restored to the position before the original position, at least, but perhaps the original position. I don't. Do you have problems with things like the shifting fences, Steve?
Shifting fences. Well, yeah, it really does come down to the quality of fence. I think if you stipulate something that's traditionally quite hard to move, then it's more of a challenge for them. But again, it's in that document that I mentioned before. If it's quite clear that you don't move the fence, or if you need to cross over the tree protection zone or whatever zone's delegated, that you have the correct sort of boarding or whatever, particularly if it's going to be frequent. And if they know it and see it and the diagrams are there, they can understand it. I think one of the main hurdles is the words like should be and if you can and statements like that. Tell them what you want. This is what needs to happen, and be quite firm without being Hitler-esque, but just sort of say, this is what we need to do, guys. We need to do this if you're going to save the trees, and tune in the people that will be in charge of the site when you're not up there, and this is going to be your responsibility to make this happen. We have really good success. We have places where there's people that are just hopeless, and you refer it back to the client and go, look, we've done everything we can here. They're not listening. It's up to you. They're your trees.
Yeah,
excellent. The last question was the most efficient way of charging per hour or quote. And the answer is yes. One of those two systems.
Depends on
I
client.
know arborists that just love quoting because they sell well and they're prepared to take punts. I think of a young arborist that I know of that probably bills out 60 hours a week and only works 35. He just has that knack of saying, look, I think this is going to take 12 hours, so I'll say it's going to take 24 hours, and if I'm wrong, I'm wrong. And he does really well. I like just charging them the hourly, and that's because everything for me is nice and simple. I don't need to make a huge profit. If I'm just busy working, that's fine. So either of those are fine.
Would you have like a minimum obviously if you're on site for 10 minutes, you still want to charge for an hour sort of thing?
Yeah, you've got to have whatever rules work for you. And so, today I went to 2 emergency appointments, and my requirement on that is I get paid a huge call-out fee. That's to stop doing whatever I'm doing and go. And then the first 30 minutes on site's included. And, I'm often on site for 10 or 15 minutes, spend 10 or 15 minutes writing report. It's all the one flat call-out because it's all included in that first initial fee. It's your rules. You make it the rules that you want and make it comfortable. And as long as it's in writing and you can tell the person beforehand, it's all fair in love and war.
Yeah.
I find a lot of clients want a fixed price fee because they need to budget for it. And if you give them an hourly rate, they understand the hourly rate, but they have no idea what the end cost's going to be, and that makes them nervous. So sometimes they'll say, yeah, give me an hourly rate, but can you estimate how long it's going to take? And I don't like doing that. I'd rather give a fixed price quote because then I know what I'm charging them. They know what they're getting charged, and I can go ahead and do the work. And as Mark says, if I do 12 hours in 8, then that's good for me. I try not to take 15 hours to do that 12-hour job.
And certainly, I've just recently started on a contract where I'm doing it for a fixed price, and what I found is our whole process, once it was at a fixed price, was about increasing efficiency. So what would have taken, 2 weeks or 3 weeks to finish off a report, what would have taken 4 hours to do the report, has now been streamlined down to, an hour and a half a report, so that it becomes efficient.
Yep.
So I don't think it really matters. Okay, next one.
Thanks,
Andy.
guys.
As talked about some scar trees, and I haven't looked at the thing, but scar trees are interesting things, or culturally modified trees. And it's been a real frustration for me as I've gone through this process, because I see anomalies that just don't make sense. So, for example, Eucalyptus camaldulensis is a fairly quick-growing species. How do we cut a coolamon out of it and have it not occlude in 40 or 50 years? And I'm not sure that you can in most situations. So what things are we looking for with a scar tree? The first thing is the tree has to be old enough. So if you talk about Sydney, we basically essentially displaced the entire community, Indigenous community, by the beginning of the 1800s, and certainly by the mid-1800s, further west of Sydney itself. So there's a scar tree in Parramatta, and it became the subject of a paper I gave a few years ago. The arborist went out, right shape, says, look, I think these are a couple of canoe trees, but it all falls apart fairly quickly because the tree is about 900 mils in diameter. It's a forest red gum, Eucalyptus teraticornis. So that puts the tree probably at the 100 to 120 year mark. And that's not early enough to have been scarred, because this was the original government house. So the tree's got to be old enough. Not only has the tree got to be old enough, but it had to have been big enough to have been scarred at that time. So if the tree was scarred when it was 60 centimetres in diameter, that means in the last 200 years, to become pre-1800, in the last 200 years, the tree's only put an extra 30 centimetres on in growth. That's a really slow growth rate for eucalypts on the east coast. When you get to the west coast, things change. So Steve's end of the world has some differences. First of all, it's drier. Second of all, we screwed around with it a lot later. So you've got to think about, when did community come through, what happened. So if you get up into Andy Erskine's end of the world, Byron Bay, the Indigenous community had largely gone by sort of the middle to the later part of the 1800s. So I need a 120 to 150-year-old wound on a tree that was big enough to have been wounded at a stage. So I'm probably looking at a 300 to 400-year-old tree, and they're few and far between, really few and far between. And so the question is, where are those trees, and how often do you see them? Dry regions, regions where white man went through and screwed things up a little later, you'll see those scar trees. If you talk about Melbourne, Rob, and you've got a number of important ones around your end of the world, the likelihood that they're scar trees is almost zero, which is a shame. So we ended up getting very frustrated with the Parramatta one, and our response was to take some samples and have them radiocarbon dated, and it turned out that the scar tree that the local organisation had set aside and braced and spent all the money on, Peter, I think you've seen it, turned out to be a 1950s wounding. So that's really not what you want. Andy, pipe in. Your mic's off.
Something's going on, Andy.
Andy's mic's off.
Yeah, I don't think you're muted, but you certainly, maybe it's got to do with your earphones.
While we're waiting, Mark, there's two in the MCG with a sign on it, so they must be, surely.
Yes, there must certainly not be. And that's the sad bit. There's a great little paper called The Disappearing Goanna. And it's by an Indigenous person looking at the fact that a very large Coolamon that had been carved in, modern Coolamon that had been carved into Comardulensis, had disappeared almost completely after 37 years. It's now up to about 45 years and it has gone altogether. I've got photographs of it in that process as well. And it's a real issue. And I think I mentioned once before, I went out to a little town called Morn. They had a tree that one of the Indigenous leaders said, look, this could be a scar tree. Can we get it looked at? And I looked at it from Google Street View and saw the rate of growth of the occlusion and said, over a 10-year period, and said, I don't think you got a chance in hell. The authority said, look, that's fine. Hop in a car, come down and have a look, which we did. When I got down there, I said, have you got any pictures from the bridge back towards the tree when you were constructing the bridge? And they said, yes. And they sent it to me. And I mapped it against the trees that were there, overlaid it and said, there's the position it was taken from. That's your trees. And I said, and you'll notice the one unusual thing is the tree that you think is a scar tree wasn't even there in 1950 when the bridge was being built. And you could see plainly that it was a young sapling. It wasn't existed as a tree. So it's really, we have this problem in aging trees and getting it right. Andy, did you manage to get your mic going? No. It hates you. It does not like you at all. No mic. By pulling the plug out, yeah. Yeah, we've got some noise from you now.
Can you?
Yeah, excellent.
Okay, so my question was in response to an article I read on the weekend from ABC talking about culturally modified trees. And you'll find that quite readily if you want to have a look. But so it wasn't, we know about the scar trees, but these were sometimes more subtle than that, where the journalist had said that the trees had been bent in a particular direction to indicate perhaps water or some resource that you should keep following their directions towards. They also spoke about trees that had small subtle signs on them, carved tiny birds which were pointing one direction, and when you went over the next sand dune you would discover the finches, which were a good indicator of water. So it was just a concept that I hadn't come across before. I'm well familiar with star trees and the remains of middens, and we're looking out for that all the time on the north coast. But I thought it was an interesting concept that I spoke to Peter about, and I'm glad he brought it up tonight.
So yes, look, so some of these things I've got in front of, we've got it opened at the moment, and I just wonder how many people understand arboriculture when they start to talk about these things. So for example, this one that's on the screen at the moment with the spiraling grain, we've got trees that have been twisted. I don't know that bonsai was a particularly fond sport of or a cultural activity of the Indigenous communities. So I'm going to take the bonsai one and say questionable. That is twisting and manipulating. There certainly were marker trees, and they often call these marker trees or indicator trees where it says something. But, it doesn't take you long to realise that this is the outside of the tree. This is a box of some description, and that's probably 30 to 40-year-old damage, maybe 50-year-old damage. So I'm guessing that probably wasn't anything of cultural significance. In other words, just like with the scar trees, when we see the shield shape, we infer upon it that it's either a shield, a coolamon, or a canoe tree. The reality is, most of them have been done, at least at the side of the roads that I see, most of them have been done by motor vehicles. Now, I say that, and I've got to declare a particular bias. My wife's Wiradjuri, so my kids are Wiradjuri. And I see what we're doing when we get it wrong is we're diluting the culture down. We're not allowing them to connect with what is real, and we're letting them connect with what's fake. And I'm amazed at how many culturally modified trees I've looked at and been able to very quickly account for it in some other way. So I can dismiss that one altogether. I can dismiss this. This is a Flinders maculata, beautiful tree. And again, the tree is probably not any older than about 50 to 60 years old, unless we're right at its western limits. And I'm guessing we're not. So, what's the likelihood that it's so Gilmore country, again, probably late 1800s, early 1900s, that the community is essentially completely displaced. So no, it's definitely not a market tree, even though it's got all the techniques, all the indications of it. Now, these things occur naturally every day anyhow. So I can show you similar things to these in America, in Europe, and I know that definitely they're not culturally modified. Otherwise, we've got things really wrong with our history. So I can dismiss that. Again, young branches, just likelihood of it, probably fairly low. By young branches, I'm saying 70 to 80 years maximum. What happens in 70 to 80 years, it's 80 years ago is 1940s. 1940s, the Indigenous community was largely displaced from its territory up in the Gilmore area. So
Thank you.
that becomes the issue for me. And there's a great court case that happened when Grafton Council unfortunately inadvertently removed a tree and was prosecuted for a culturally modified tree, and it was patently obvious that the tree wasn't anywhere near old enough to have been anything else but planted by a human, modern human, not a scar tree. So finding these things means that we've got to have, let's say we wanted to have this as a marker tree, this would have to be a 140-year-old plus tree. And that makes it really big and really old. It would have to be 140 years old if it was being done as they were being displaced. If it was being done prior to them being displaced, it must have been even bigger and older. We might be looking at, 200-year-old tree. And, unfortunately, that's not, although it's beautiful. I love Flindersia. Is everyone familiar with Flindersia maculata or leopardwood or? No,
I don't see a lot of them around here, Mark.
No, they're not. They're more out west of New South Wales, and they're just delightful. There's two basic forms of it. One's more upright and one's very weeping. And the weeping form has the branches go up and then cascade down the foliages at the end, and they look spectacular. Just an underused tree, unfortunately. So that's the problem, Andy, for me, is that the tree's got to be old enough. The artifact's got to be old enough. The artifact must be something that was used. So I see things that don't make sense. So, for example, in the coastal Indigenous communities, I'll see scar trees that are just, or canoe trees that are just shaped like a canoe, except in the coastal areas, they had canoes that were wrapped canoes with high sides, so they didn't drown when they went out in the smallest of surf. Well, not that they would have drowned, but the canoe would have gone down. Whereas if you're talking about those along the Murrumbidgee, they did use a curved bark canoe with the outside or the normal side of the tree facing the water. A wrap canoe is made by taking a hole the bark all the way around, and then inverting it and then tying the ends together. And when you do that, and then you can see there's some modern ones being done fairly recently, and you can see some of them in the collections in the museums. Those sort of canoe trees don't exist anymore. They were dead once you took the bark off from all the way around. So when I see one on Port Hacking or Port Botany and they say to me, oh, this is a canoe tree, I just think, you've lost connection automatically with how your culture made their canoes. You need to go back and rethink that. So hopefully that gives you some thoughts on it. Steve or Jeremy, do you have anything to add?
Very difficult. We do a fair bit out on the mine sites with scar trees, and a couple of the groups we work with are really good, and some of them are really terrible. Some of them will listen to you, and some of them won't.
Yeah, look, I guess I have an unfair advantage in having. I work a lot in my own family's country. But it's easy enough if you can explain the science behind it. So tree must be old enough. So when was the community displaced? You get over into Steve's end of the world, and some of the community wasn't displaced. It's still present. Get up in the Northern Territory, the community's still present. So those you'll find more modern things. And as I said, the other thing is when you get over sort of past that western slopes of New South Wales, Queensland, Victoria, once you start going further west, it gets drier and the growth rate drops. And my favourite tree to teach that is a Grevillea pools can at Milparinka. And it's got a scarring on it would now be close enough to 180 years of age. And you can see how little it's grown. And then you look around, you see the fence posts around you, and you think, yeah, I know how we ruined our inland environment. So we're cutting down 150, 200-year-old trees to put fence posts in. You're thinking, no, don't. So, yeah, the drier it gets, the greater the chance you've got of finding it. It's also the latter that we started to mess with the communities. And as I said, a whole part of the communities, once you get to South Australia, Northern Territory, Western Australia, were able to hold themselves together to some extent and not be completely displaced, although we screwed up in so many spots in that area. So what is great is seeing, and I don't know whether you have seen it, but there's modern scar trees or modern culturally modified trees, and they're really important because they're, again, helping people teach and see. So I can now show you a half a dozen culturally modified trees where on one side they've pulled it over.
So is this is the cultural modification of trees restricted to native Indigenous Australians, or are there other introduced communities going to want to try and share the same option to be able to represent their culture?
Look, there is some there in terms of the old culture, and some of it, unfortunately, has been put into the Indigenous communities collection. I looked at some in a small little mining town out in the Wiradjuri country, and they were clearly modern axe with a castellated top, which is typical of how Europeans are collected, but it also may have been European influence onto traditionals, but it was a 1950s, 1960s scar. And yes, that's good because it tells you something about how people used to do things, how you used to cut bark to make a bark hut. If you try with an axe all the way around, it was harder than going one side, one side, one side, one side. So they would cut with the axe and make these castellations at the top of the things because they were using, reasonably good quality metal axes. So
the surveyors used to blazing trees to put a mark there as well, and you can still see some of them lurking around.
Yeah, you absolutely do.
Well,
And road services did it as well. RMS often blazed marker spots.
It's
Andy, you were
interesting.
saying something?
Yeah, is it is culturally modified trees limited to damaging them? I seem to have lost everyone's picture. Is it
No, look, I
limited to
think
damaging?
it also includes using them, Steve. And one of the ones that we can talk about but not talk about are birthing trees. And we believe there was a birthing tree, a fig tree. It was a fig tree. It's not there. I think some of my students have been to see with one with me at Middle Brother National Park, and it probably is a birthing tree. It's maybe a 350-year-old specimen, but we can't ever investigate that because we're men, and it's just considered taboo. I've tried to get funding for it. I've tried to get it done because I suspect we're probably down to 2 or 3 of those in the East Coast left, and that's about it.
There's supposedly one in Taunton, just near Noosa. I don't know that it's old enough, but supposed to be one. And the other one I've come across recently is, they're claimed to be shelter trees next to creek lines where they've bent them over. They're certainly old enough, but I don't know how else you'd prove it other than they're a bent tree.
Yeah, and that sort of becomes one of those weird things again. And one of the things that you will often see amongst people that go out and say, look, this might be a scar tree. And I mean, I love it when it happens is I was at a mine and someone said, I think this is a canoe tree. And I looked at the community representatives and said, guys, it's 40 kilometres from a river. I don't want to be rude, but are you guys stupid? Or are you smart enough that you'd make your canoe where you're going to use it? It's the same with bark shelter. You see bark shelter and you see caves or good spots. Apart from it, why is someone making a bark shelter? I mean, bark shelters are great, but they're not your first choice. Natural forms that exist are your first choice because they're easy and people are smart. And I think that somehow or other we forget that they're smart, and that becomes almost a patronizing approach of saying, look, you'll cut a canoe here because, and I suspect that when it comes to coulamons, wooden coulamons, and most coulamons are wood, not bark. Bark has a habit of splitting, so it's not as good as a coulamon. Wood is a lot better to come with a coulamon. And shields, particularly sparring shields, which are very narrow and very heavy, I suspect most of those would have been cut out of fallen tree material. As the communities moved around, they'd have seen storms, they'd have seen a tree fallen over, they'd have seen a big limb dropped, and that just becomes the perfect way to cut things rather than trying to make life difficult for yourself and having to cut wood out of something that's 3 meters up a tree. Nature naturally provides fallen material to collect. So I wonder how much of what we see comes now. There are some differences, and I know the Gilmore do it and the Wiradjuri do it, and that's dendroglyphs. And they're a whole different thing when they start carving into the tree. And again, most of those were collected and put into museums. There are a few left, but not a lot of the dendroglyphs are left out in the in original environment. And that's in part because once you've wounded a tree and you've taken a 50% girdle of it, essentially, it either wants to close up or it stresses and dies and then rots away. And neither of those are really good at giving us something 50 and 60 and 100 years later. And I'm going to go from memory. There's a great text on the subject, but I'm pretty sure it was Eldridge that was going around in the 1940s and 1950s collecting 60 and 70-year-old dendroglyphs because they were starting to go to decay and termites. So, that's not a long period of time. And I think those ones that you'll find out there are the minority, not the majority. And carbon dating does work if you want to go that route, but it's a hard route to go because carbon dating has these unusual sets of curves because of our use of atomic materials. So you end up with these uncertainties. Is the tree 1300s or is the tree, 1950s? Well, I'll go 1950s because that seems to be a more logical answer. But you do get these unusual uncertainties in it. And so if you're getting a really old tree, if you're getting a 400-year-old tree, you get really good accuracy.
What's the cost of radiocarbon dating, Mark?
Oh, Rob, you never ask me money questions because I don't know. It's just money. I don't think it's that expensive. I think it was about $300 or so to get done. And I know that we paid more than we needed to because we wanted it rushed. And I know we got it done offshore because the wait in Australia was about 6 months. But I know you can get it done really quickly if you've got a nice university connection. I just don't have that connection. So for us, it was having a laboratory in the US take care of that for us. But it wasn't expensive. I mean, under $1,000 in my mind. Anything that's under $1,000 is, just a part of doing business. And in that case, it was because it was frustrating me as a tree. It was really obvious from my side that there was something wrong. It just didn't tally up. When it's getting closer to the mark, I'm less concerned. But I would expect for the growth rate for us, and Andy, you're in even better growing conditions in terms of rainfall. I'd be expecting to see a tree that's well over 2 meters in diameter if it was a standard eucalypt. If I was talking about something that was slower growing, I don't know, casuarina, I might expect it to be 1.5 meters, 1.25 meters, something like that. These are unusual trees to start off with. Growth rates are fairly easy to check. It doesn't take you a lot to cut off a branch that's not anything to do with the modification. Take that branch and have a look at how quickly it's growing, or just start looking at the growth rate of others nearby. And aerial images have been really useful in doing that. Yes.
Thank you, Mark. Your explanation has been very well considered and good advice. Thank you.
There is a paper I did on it, and Peter can probably get it to you, that looked at the requirements, the 4 requirements for it to be a culturally modified tree. And again, that's been well accepted by the Indigenous community, which is really good.
Yeah, I'll just add that I haven't actually witnessed a culturally modified tree on the North Coast personally in the 20 years that I've been.
I would be surprised. Just with the way we did things, and you're close enough to it. Go to Wollongbar TAFE and have a look at the Camargulens, the Pterocornis near the greens and the dam, big Pterocornis, and we know that's about an 1880s or later tree, and that's well over 2 meters in diameter, and it just gives you an idea of how quickly things grow. And I think we often get dating wrong, and in fact it's one of those discussions, and it's worthwhile talking about, that has come up with Stands Australia, and I can't tell you any more than that, but this process of trying to estimate the life expectancy of a tree, useful life expectancy, is a fascinating one. Craig Hinton gave a paper in the UK a few years ago where from NSPEC data, that's their most unreliable piece of information they collect. We're not good at predicting the age of a tree. We're not good at predicting how much longer it's going to live for. Yeah. So the last question that came up from Steve, and it's, what do you do? What do you say? How do you cope when you see a risk assessment that is patently, well, if I say flawed, that would be a good way of saying it. How do you deal with that? And you're going to see them all the time. That's just the nature of the beast. You know, if it's a report that you've got to respond to, then you can respond to it fairly and honestly. When it's not a report that you can respond to, so it's, you know, you've just seen it second hand or third hand, my recommendation in life is far too important to spend time chasing every faulty report. Otherwise, you'd have to spend at least 4 hours a day at my office reading my reports to find the errors, and they're there. But I think one of the big problems that arborists face in using track and in using QTRA and in doing risk assessments in general is following the system. And I cannot, for the life of me, figure out why that doesn't happen. If you're going to risk rate a tree, you should tell the reader what elements you put into that risk rating. So what part are you worried about failing? And there's actually a minimum performance criteria for tree risk assessment produced by Arbos. Peter, I believe it's in the Dropbox, is it?
Not the MIS, I don't think so. It's
No, it's not the MIS. It's a minimum performance criteria. It's a one-pager. It says at the absolute minimum you should do X, Y, Z. So can you email me, Peter, and I will put it in the Dropbox. So those of you who want access to the Dropbox, let Peter know, and he'll give you a link to it. But it says you should be able to tell us the part you're concerned about. So no point saying a branch might fall. That deals out. You've got to tell us which branch is going to fail, or which branch you're concerned about. Then you need to tell the reader. Someone's giving me feedback.
Steve's got a bit of feedback going on. I mute his system when he's not talking, but that's where it's coming from.
Thank you. So we want to know what's the occupation rate or the likelihood of the target being present. So we're worried about a person. And I think we talked about last time, for example, a person in a school, or a school is used 16% of the time on average. That's not a lot. And students are out for somewhere between 20 and 25% of the time that they're at school. So that's, again, now about 4%. That's a fairly small. And under that particular tree, they might be, if it's an out of bounds area, never there. So you should be able to tell us that, how often the target's present. And that's an estimate, and that's fine. You just tell us that's your estimate, because that way we can compare. I can come along and say, hey, Peter, you said that a student was going to be under that tree for 4 hours every day. I'm going to be able to say, well, what's he doing there on Saturday and Sunday and school holidays and public holidays? And Peter's going to say, wow, never thought about that. Okay. So this is why we want to disclose these things when we're doing a risk assessment. We want to talk about the likelihood of the part failing. And so when someone says to me, oh, the tree's got a codominant stem and it's probable that it's going to fail, they're meaning to me that it's more likely to fail than not. It's probably better than 50% chance it's going to fail in the next year. And if they've got 10 of these in a school and 5 of them didn't fail in the last year, there's a alarm bell should be going off because it's not aligning up. And then they should talk about the consequence. And all of this, according to our minimum performance criteria, all of this is done with the most likely scenarios. So we don't want you to tell us what could possibly conceivably happen. And my classic example for this is phoenix spikes. People that work with phoenix palms get spiked, and I think most of us know what they're like and know how unpleasant that is. A gentleman got a phoenix spike in the southern Illawarra area about 20 odd years ago, got septicemia and died. So you could say, oh, if you get phoenix spike, you could die. So we mustn't work with phoenix palms because they can kill you. But how many people have been killed by phoenix spikes resulting in septicemia? Here's the only one I know of. Thousands of people work with phoenixes worldwide, cultivating them to produce dates. So something's gone wrong with that equation. If I say worst case scenario, most likely somewhere between $200 and $400 worth of harm that allows for some surgery, some time off work, bits of everything, including a really remote chance of death. Whatever system you use, make sure you follow it. And when it comes to track talks about, or BTRA, more accurately, the basic tree risk assessment, that's a part of the track qualification. The BTRA paperwork says that imminent failure is something that is rarely seen by arborists. And that automatically tells me dead branches usually aren't imminent failure. The number of times I've seen an arborist put down dead branch, imminent failure, and today was a dead branch, imminent failure. I went back there 6 months later and I said, dead branch, maintenance work. One of the dead branches was over a metal rate protected air conditioning system. Maximum damage that's going to occur if it falls is probably $50 or $80 worth of steel bending. And yet that tree was considered to be an extreme risk and needed to be dealt with on a matter of urgency. Thank goodness the school never got around to doing it, because it just isn't supported by the process. Niels.
Yes, you were talking about the 4% occupancy at schools. Do you quantify that with how many students there are? Or...
Yeah, there are times when you need to. So I did one the other day that was a cross-country track through a bushland area. And I said to the school, how many times do you practice on the cross-country course? They said, usually once before the day and then on the day. So I said twice, okay. I said, will you run the cross-country course when there's strong winds going? They said, no. I said, will you run it during storms? They said no and laughed. And so what's the occupation rate going to be when failure is most likely to occur? The answer is almost zero. But even if it wasn't, I think there were 300 students. That meant there were 1,400 movements under the tree in the year. That's 5 movements in a day, roughly, little under 5. And that's 5 pedestrian movements walking. That's a low occupation rate. So when you consider that's weather modified, I just said, they're dead trees there. You don't need to remove them. They could be falling apart as far as I'm concerned. They could be wobbling in the ground. And the answer is it's still maintenance work. And I think that's one of the problems for arborists, is we're afraid to say there's work that can be done on trees apart from risk mitigation. Generally caring for trees, pruning trees, removing dead branches, they're all just general maintenance work. And so often we like to say, the tree's got dead branches, let's put this down as risk management, and we get crazy. We get things that just don't make sense. And I'll tell you how crazy it's getting in schools and getting around. Have a look at this this image here. Now, this is in a school. This is a school I was at yesterday, or day before yesterday. Yesterday. Does anyone see anything remotely stupid about that?
Yeah, we discussed it earlier, so I know.
No, you're out. You're out. Anyone else?
3 points of contact.
Yeah. How do you have 3 points of contact going upstairs? The answer is you have to have both hands on the rail, and you lift one foot, then you lift the next foot. But try going upstairs like that. That's what it's telling you to do. What they've done is they've taken a warning sign from ladders and tried to transpose it onto stairs and shown that they're absolute idiots and morons. What it should have said is, if you're feeling difficulties going up or downstairs, use the handrail as an aid and support. Okay? But we become so risk stupid. And now that's not the bad bit about this. The bad bit is this.
Would you say that that's to, like they say, 3 points of contact? Because then if somebody does have an accident, then there's no way that you can claim an insurance against them because you didn't have 3 points of contact. So therefore, you're not, like, they're not at fault.
You're not at fault anyhow under the Civil Liabilities Act. You've done a reasonable thing. You've built an Australian standard stairs. Now, we understand stairs are dangerous. I'm lost track of it, but I think the mortality rate from stairs is about 1 in 300,000 or thereabouts. So they're dangerous enough. If you want, I'll go look it up again. We took it out of our data set when Alex died from falling downstairs. But in terms of this is a commercially produced sign that says that somebody's not even thought about the whole process, and we just become totally risk averse. And I think it's just a good indication of what happens when we stop thinking in the risk communication. And I love saying it in my reports that if I've assessed trees correctly, tree parts should fail. And when I get the call up and say the branch fell off a tree, I say, wow, that's what we suggested was going to happen. Steve Kneebone?
I'll just unmute. Yeah, one of the things that concerns me about tree risk assessments, and I know Peter did a great paper on comparing the three, is that I see far too many people confusing it and using different sections of different risk assessments to do one report. I think I shared one with Mark before, a classic one where a guy had presented what he said was a QTRA assessment. Magically, every one of the trees had 4 defects. They managed to find 4 defects in each tree. One defect was a low-hanging branch, which is just incredible. But he started off by saying he'd done an ISA level 2 VTA to get his QTRA results, never put in any of the values of QTRA, and then listed them as low, medium, and high in his assumptions. Now, this is someone that's got a very high qualification or in arboriculture, but they've completely messed up this risk assessment. Now, he's going to go and recommend work, and all the work's going to be done on a site that's absolutely needless. So there needs to be a clear directive somewhere to use a system, but don't try and mesh 3 systems or 4 systems together. It just doesn't work. You're going to end up in a whole pile of trouble. In actual fact, I think if something did result because of this report and there was any sort of call for explanation, the poor chap he'd be defenseless. And I'm not even sure he realises he's made a mistake. He probably doesn't looking at it. But I mean, the rest of the report is pointless anyway, because it just doesn't tell you anything. But just a word of warning is stick to one and don't conflict it with another one, because if you're going to look for defence from perhaps the author, if it's valid, David Evans, if it's QTRA, Mike Ellison, and you've messed their system up with someone else, you're probably going to lose that defence.
Yeah, follow the system, and it's just user error is abhorrent.
I remember in the early days of QTRA development when we were, developing the system and people were using it and trying it and commenting. There was a great forum that was very widely used. A lot of times I recall people saying, yeah, I'm using QTRA, but I don't like this part about it, so I'm doing it like this. And I think it used to drive
Mike crazy, still does.
Mike crazy.
Drives David crazy.
Don't follow the system, follow the system, follow the system.
Thought I'd share you a couple more just to let you know the society that we live in. Every post in the school was padded like this, because you could run into one of these posts and hurt yourself, and we all get that. Lots of these posts are dangerous. So this is their school main play area, and I'm not going to name the school and criticize it, but you can see $200,000 worth of padding. But most of you might not have noticed the absolutely dangerous exposed brick corners. In other words, we just focus on the things we want to get focused on. And unfortunately, as arborists, one of the things we've got to avoid is being focused on trees being dangerous, because the reality is the data tells us they're not dangerous. It's rare for you to see a tree that's going to be a problematic one. In fact, for us to see a tree that is, one of those ones that's unacceptable or extreme risk is just so rare. So when I see 3 extreme risk trees or 30 tolerable trees in a school, I already know there's a problem with the report. The data should be consistent with what you see. And if it's not, you've got a problem. The last one I thought I'd share with you, and then I think we should probably call it a night. And I just thought it was worthwhile saying, this is from my own property. This is a water pipe, and most amazingly, not the best shots, but the roots had grown in active water pipes. This is Sydney Water's line, and you can see roots have actually grown in and plugged it up. The reason why, pressure's not great enough. This is a riparian species that tolerates saturation, has erenchymal roots, so its roots have grown in. Erenchymal roots, specially modified roots that allow for transport of air, so we can get enough oxygen down, we're fine. And so these roots have come in and blocked up an actively functioning pipe. And for months, I've been frustrated about the fact that my water pressure has been dropping and dropping and dropping. And then finally, about a week ago, we found the area in which the pressure was dropping after the Sydney Water replaced the meter. The meter was faulty and we had low pressure on the property, but we still had a portion of the property with low pressure. And then our plumber came out and pulled the section apart, and there was the fault. So there's something that's the first time I've ever seen that in my working career. I've seen them in sewage lines, but never in an actively running pipe.
Do you think the pipe itself would have to have been damaged for the tree to get in there?
This is a blue streak or blue line pipe, so it's plastic with an olive, and there would have been a small micro leak there already, absolutely, Peter, that allowed a root to get in. As that root got bigger, it was able to take up more space and so on. And the actual size of the root that it penetrated through, I didn't get to see, but I'm guessing it was probably only 2 mils across. But that's enough when you divide to block things up. Yes, is it Locke?
Yeah. So, like, what's the realistic stats of saying trees do block pipes? You hear a lot of people talk about, oh, trees there, it's probably going to block these pipes, or they're going to damage the foundation and stuff. Is it really as bad as people think it is?
No. Let's deal with the footings. Very seldom will they lift a building. They can cause matrix suction on highly reactive clay soils. But again, that's an engineering issue in my mind, not a tree issue. That is, the building's built for the fact that trees exist, or for that matter, turf grass, buffalo will cause the same problems. Then, they shouldn't be doing that. In terms of how often do they actually crack pipes, you can go online, have a look. There's a copy of the paper on my website, on Waverley Council's, a few others. We looked at a vitreous clay pipe, and a tree root cannot crush or break a vitreous clay pipe. There's work by an engineer, sewer engineer Stein, Professor Stein, wonderful textbook on the subject. And his comment is, when roots are in the pipes, it's usually because there's been earlier or prior damage to the pipes. And in vitreous clay, one of the ways that can happen is just in transport or in handling. So they drop a pipe on the ground, it gets a micro fracture, and eventually that starts to leak. Things happen and then things break. But most root ingress into pipes is a result of a failure of the join, just like this one was. And I can prove that for you. Luck is when you go to the nursery and you see those little liner bags, 20-litre liner bags or 10-litre liner bags, plastic bags. How many times have you seen a root growing right through that plastic bag? I see them split them over time, but I've never seen one grow through. And they're only 0.6 of a mil thick or thinner. So what do you do when you've got a 3 millimeter thick pipe or a terracotta pipe? The roots just don't grow through them. You know, terracotta pots have been around for centuries. I've got some terracotta pots here. Again, never see roots just growing through the terracotta pot, and somehow or other doing things. So largely a myth. There's a guy who I really like, Joe Lilly, and Joe will get a call from he's a council officer. You get a call from the ratepayer, and they'll say, "Your council trees' roots are in our pipes." And he'll say, "Okay, just dig around and expose and show it to me." So they'll call him back a few weeks later and say, "We've dug it up and we've found your roots, and it's your roots in the pipe." And you go out there and say, "Yep, and your pipe's leaking. Here's a penalty infringement notice for having leaking sewer line. Fix your pipes." And that's it. And I give him my hooray for that one. I think it's often we want to blame the tree for everything rather than saying, look, sewers, pipework, the old terracotta was designed to last 30 to 40 years. It went out in the 1970s. That means almost all terracotta is past its intended use by date. And it would be like saying, look, I painted my house 40 years ago and the tree is letting water splash back down onto the siding on my house or the side of my house and it's causing the wood to rot. No, it's not causing the wood to rot. The fact that you haven't maintained your paintwork is why it's having that problem. And I think we want to, again, just go straight at the tree and have a go and say, look, the tree's cracked the pipes, the tree's blocked the pipes. Yeah, tree's causing the blockage, but it's causing the blockage because you haven't maintained it. Can tree roots...
So it's a maintenance and a building issue more so than a tree issue, but people use it as a bit of...
Can tree roots crush modern PVC pipes? The answer is yes. I think there are situations where that can occur if you use the standard lowest grade of stormwater and sewage pipe. And it was a question that was raised in a court case about 2 years ago. And we argued that it really is the responsibility of people doing plumbing work to design appropriately engineered, what we call fit for purpose plumbing. And in that case, we said fit for purpose was putting in heavier wall. Now, I have a piece of it. I don't know that I've still got it in my office. I'll just have a quick check. No, I've taken it out. I've got a piece of stormwater pipe that's 10 millimeter thick wall. I can drive my truck over that and it won't distort. So you can put thicker wall pipe in. The reason why plumbers use the thinnest wall is the materials are cheap, but plumbers still charge the same amount of money to do the plumbing work, whether it's thin wall or, you know, next one up, a nominal increase in thickness pressure pipe. It costs the same amount of money to do either of them. So in real terms, most people are only saving on the plumbing in their house maybe $2,000 or $3,000 and not making it forever. And the other thing that should be happening with plumbing is expansion joints. And they do make for drainage of all sorts of expansion joints. Things move, and if you don't have provision for that movement, particularly in any of the clay soils, eventually the joint will crack. And as soon as you get a crack, either crack right through the wall or crack of the seal, things leak. Now, the seal cracks because plumbers, I'm not saying your plumber would, but plumbers put a dab of glue around and then push, and that's it. And the actual instructions say push and twist for half a turn. In other words, twist so that you know you've got it all the way around. And so the number of times I've seen plumbing joints that are broken apart where the glue is given way tells me it wasn't properly glued in the first place. And again, that'll get blamed on the tree.
So how does that discussion go? Like, obviously, you suggested fit for purpose being the term to use, but how do you tell somebody that their plumber 20 years ago has designed a fit for purpose plumbing system because they've got a couple of big trees beside the house?
That's exactly what you say.
Yeah, right.
It's not. This is not a tree issue. This is a plumbing issue. And you know, one of the things that if you've got the old terracotta and you can get them re-sleeved, re-sleeving is wonderful. Re-sleeving comes with a 25-year guarantee. And my first challenge then is, if re-sleeving comes with a 25-year guarantee, why won't you plumber put a 25-year guarantee on the repair of the works? Re-sleeving will do it with the trees in situ. Why won't your plumber do it? And the answer is because most plumbers, no, that's not fair. Some plumbers don't do good quality work. It just, if it was 20 years ago, I get that it might not have been the best. But who here is driving the car they were driving 20 years ago? And who hasn't spent money on it in that 20 years? Nobody. Well, you've got a plumbing system that's doing something, you're going to spend money on maintaining it. And so when that pipe got plugged up, I didn't turn around and say, wow, that was bad, but, that's the way it goes. I see Gerald with a hand up.
Yeah, hi Mark, hi everybody. What about lateral or vertical displacement as roots increase in diameter and press against pipes? I've seen that quite a few times, and the pipe gets displaced and then the pipe fails or breaks and then the roots get in.
I challenged whether it was in fact the displacement, Gerald. And Gerald's here as a, you might have noticed he's got a strange accent. He's Kiwi. And he's here as a mentor as well. And I hadn't realised you were here, Gerald. I question how often it's displaced. And the reason I question it is a root's got to be at least as thick as the pipe to displace the pipe in order to get enough surface area, to get enough pressure to do anything. Otherwise, the root gets pushed. Because each force is an equal and opposite force, and we forget about that. So this is why, for example, roots seldom lift a building. You think about a building. A building's engineered with a footing that's 500 millimeters wide to stop the building from sinking. So how does a root that's only 200 mils wide pick up that building that needs a footing 500 mils wide to stop it from sinking without that root sinking? And the reason that the root has to sink is the pressure is greater above than below. So the root gives way.
Did some interesting work on this. I think it was Biddle, where he measured the pressure that the roots can exert as they grow.
Yeah, the challenge, one of the difficulties with that is that the pipes were installed in a trench, and the trench was wider and deeper than the pipe. And you might then say, Mark, that the plumbers didn't do a proper job backfilling, but the trench itself is the conduit for the roots, and the undisturbed edge of a trench is more firm than the disturbed edge of a trench. So there's scope for the pipe to displace into the disturbed soil.
Yeah, and that is what the Standards Australia standard would say, is that the backfilling wasn't done to standard.
Yeah.
And I take your situation that there can be conditions where that happens. And again, it goes back to bad plumbing. But if you're talking about a consolidated trench, and a trench after 10 or 15 years is usually really well consolidated, you'd have to be unlucky to have a root that got to the same sort of size, have enough surface area to give you that lateral push. Remembering that as it pushes against that pipe is exerting an equal and opposite force the other direction. So the smaller of the two will get moved. And that's why I'm saying you've really got to get a root. And yeah, I agree, Gerald. I've certainly seen fig roots get to those sort of proportions running through trenches. But again, mostly due to the fact that the trenches weren't backfilled properly. And there was a stage where we went through this fad of wanting to put sand around everything. And sand, of course, it allows easy access for roots to grow through, grow close.
Very nice conduit, yeah.
Yeah. So the answer is build appropriately, build better. And if you're building out of heavy wall, pressure pipe for your plumbing, you build once, build for life. And I got that idea off a developer many years ago when I went up to his place with a tree spade and he had terrazzo tiles on concrete. I said, I'm not driving across it. I'm not going to break the concrete. And he said, you won't. It's 8 inches thick. I said, it's a driveway. It won't be 8 inches thick. He said, I'm the builder. Trust me, it's 8 inches thick. And I said, why? He said, it cost me the same amount of money to finish the concrete off. The only extra I have to pay for is the extra concrete. And as a result, I can have things that are built forever. He made millions. He was in our wealthiest and unfortunately died in dubious situation, probably killed. But very clever businessman, and I really took that to heart. So all of my hard stand around here varies between 200 mils thick and in spots up to a metre thick. And I think Peter's been here and knows, and Neil's, it's genuinely the case. It was designed to be able to take a crane on it operating without any problems. I just didn't want to have cracked concrete.